The wind was soft that morning when Katie first felt it, a tight, breathless pain that crept through her chest like a whisper of something waiting to unfold. It wasn't sharp or sudden, not yet. It was the kind of ache that lingered quietly, the kind that one ignores because it seems too faint to matter. She pressed her hand to her heart, took a deep breath, and told herself it was nothing, just stress, exhaustion, the residue of sleepless nights and emotional storms. But deep down, beneath all her rationalizations, a quiet dread began to bloom. It was not the kind of fear that screamed. It was the kind that waited, patient and merciless. Her reconciliation with Bill had been the talk of everyone around her, an unexpected but inevitable return. People said they were meant for each other, two halves orbiting the same chaos, always colliding, always finding their way back. But Katie knew better. Love with Bill Spencer was never peaceful. It was a storm disguised as devotion, a promise that came wrapped in equal parts tenderness and destruction. Still, when he reached for her hand again, when he looked at her with that quiet sincerity that only appeared when he thought he was losing her, she couldn't refuse. She told herself that forgiveness was a form of strength, that maybe this time would be different, that the years had softened him, that the pain had changed her, that their scars could align instead of clash. In truth, it was neither forgiveness nor hope that guided her. It was fatigue, the exhaustion of being alone, of carrying the burden of what-ifs, of realizing that life, without him, wasn't peace, but emptiness. She needed to believe in something again, and Bill was still that familiar gravity that kept her tethered to the world. Yet as soon as she returned to him, the symptoms began. At first, she blamed stress. Then she blamed time. But when the pain grew more frequent, when her hands trembled holding her morning coffee, when her breath shortened after the simplest walk, she knew it was something more sinister. She kept it secret. That was her first instinct, the same reflex she'd always had when life spun beyond her control. She told no one. Not Bill, not Brooke, not even her doctor, until the pain forced her into the clinic. The diagnosis came quietly, the words delivered in the sterile calm of an office too white, too bright to contain such devastation. A degenerative cardiac condition, the doctor said.
Progressive.
Dangerous. Possibly terminal, if left untreated. She stared at the scan, at the tiny blur of muscle on the screen that represented her life. It looked fragile, almost translucent. She thought of Will, of Bill, of the reunion that had begun as hope and might now end in grief. She wondered if this was fate's cruel symmetry, that just when she had let love back into her life, her body had already begun to betray her. Katie left the hospital in silence, the weight of the news pressing against her ribs like a secret she could neither carry nor release. The city shimmered outside, oblivious to her unraveling. She walked aimlessly through the streets, the afternoon sun flickering off the glass towers, each reflection a reminder of how small she felt. Her phone rang, Bill's name lighting up the screen, but she couldn't answer.
Not yet.
How could she tell him that the second chance he had begged for might already be slipping away? Bill had been different lately, quieter, more attentive. It unnerved her at first, the way he'd started to notice the smallest things, how she stirred her tea, how she hesitated before laughing, how her eyes sometimes seemed far away. He had changed, she thought. Age had stripped him of arrogance, love had humbled him. But it also made him more vulnerable. She could see how deeply he needed her now, not as a prize or possession, but as an anchor in a world he could no longer control. He had lost too much already: trust, stability, reputation. She couldn't bear to be the next loss he'd have to face.
So she decided to keep it hidden.
She would protect him from the truth, at least for a while. It was not courage that drove her, it was love mixed with fear, that dangerous combination that makes people believe they can control the inevitable. She told herself she could manage it. She began taking medication quietly, scheduling doctor visits between business meetings, hiding test results behind folders. When the fatigue worsened, she said she was overworked. When Bill noticed her pallor, she smiled and blamed the weather. Each lie came easily because it was born out of love, but every lie also tightened the noose around her. At night, when Bill was asleep beside her, Katie would lie awake listening to the rhythmic sound of his breathing, feeling the irregular rhythm of her own heart stumble against it. Sometimes she would imagine what it would be like when he found out. The image haunted her, his face tightening, his voice breaking, his anger turning inward because he wouldn't know where else to place it. Bill didn't know how to grieve quietly. His grief was volcanic, dangerous, unrestrained. If she died, she feared he would destroy himself in the process. Or worse, seek solace in the wrong places. She had seen it before. She knew exactly what losing her would turn him into. And then one morning Luna came back. She arrived the way ghosts always do, without warning, without permission, carrying the scent of unfinished stories. Luna had always been a shadow at the edge of Bill's world, the woman who had once nearly dismantled his life under the guise of love. Her beauty was as sharp as ever, but time had given her a new kind of power, quieter, more strategic, more dangerous. When she appeared at Spencer Publications, claiming she only wanted to reconnect, Katie felt an old chill crawl up her spine. Bill dismissed it at first, assuring Katie there was nothing to worry about. But Katie saw the glint in Luna's eyes, the subtle way she studied Bill, the calculated pauses in her speech. It wasn't affection, it was hunger. Luna's presence complicated everything. Katie was already fragile, physically and emotionally, and Luna's return felt like a test she wasn't strong enough to face. Each time Luna smiled at Bill, each time she lingered in conversation, Katie felt the old wounds reopen, the memories of betrayal, the ache of never being enough. But this time, it wasn't jealousy that consumed her, it was dread. Because she knew she might not be there much longer to protect him from people like Luna. Her health began to decline faster than expected. There were days when she could barely stand, when her heart raced uncontrollably, when her vision blurred as if the world were slipping away from her frame by frame. She told herself it was just fatigue, that she could rest later. But her body refused to cooperate. The pain became a constant companion, not sharp anymore, but deep and gnawing, like a quiet whisper reminding her that time was running out. One afternoon, she collapsed in the kitchen. Bill found her minutes later, her hand clutching the counter, her face pale and drenched in sweat. The ambulance siren wailed through the city as he held her hand, his voice cracking as he begged her to stay awake. She wanted to tell him the truth right there, that this wasn't the first time, that she had known for months, that she had lied because she couldn't bear to see that look in his eyes. But she couldn't speak. She could only squeeze his hand weakly and hope he would understand without words. At the hospital, the truth could no longer be hidden. The doctors told Bill what she hadn't, the severity, the risk, the prognosis. His anger was volcanic. When Katie woke, the first thing she saw was his face, tear-streaked, hardened with rage and sorrow. "How long?" he asked, his voice breaking. "How long have you been hiding this from me?" She turned away, ashamed. "Since before the party," she whispered. "Since before everything fell apart." Bill couldn't decide what hurt more, the fact that she was dying, or the fact that she hadn't trusted him enough to tell him. His instinct was to fight, to throw money and influence at the problem, to demand solutions that didn't exist. He talked to specialists, arranged experimental treatments, refused to hear the word terminal. But Katie, weak and pale in her hospital bed, knew what he refused to accept, that love could not save her. The hardest part wasn't the pain, it was watching Bill suffer. He sat beside her every night, holding her hand as if sheer willpower could keep her alive. Sometimes he would talk about the future, about trips they would take, promises he would keep. She would listen, smiling faintly, knowing she would never see those days. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let him believe himself. But every time she closed her eyes, she felt the weight of reality pressing down, her heart weakening, her body surrendering. She began to write letters. One for Bill, one for Will, one for Brooke. She wrote them slowly, between bouts of dizziness, her handwriting growing weaker with each passing day. In Bill's letter, she told him not to let grief consume him, not to let guilt drive him into darkness. She begged him not to let Luna in. "She will come when I am gone," she wrote, "and she will know exactly what to say. She will promise you comfort, but what she wants is control. Please don't let her take what's left of you." She hid the letters in her desk drawer, uncertain if anyone would ever find them. Some days, she thought about giving them to Brooke, but she couldn't bring herself to say goodbye out loud. Hope was cruel, but it was still hope. As her condition worsened, Luna's visits became more frequent. She offered sympathy cloaked in manipulation, bringing flowers, asking Bill how he was holding up, staying just long enough to make her presence impossible to ignore. Katie watched from her hospital bed as Luna's charm began to weave itself back into Bill's life. She saw the guilt in his eyes, the exhaustion, the fear, and she knew how easy it would be for him to fall again. One night, Katie woke to find Bill asleep in the chair beside her. His head rested against her arm, his hand still gripping hers. The sight broke her heart. He had always been larger than life, powerful, unyielding, but now he looked small, fragile, human. She brushed her fingers through his hair, memorizing the feel of him, the warmth of his skin, the weight of his presence. She wanted to freeze that moment, to keep it somewhere beyond death's reach. She whispered softly, though he couldn't hear, "I love you. I'm sorry." Weeks passed, and her body began to fail. The doctors offered treatments that might prolong her life, but not save it. Bill begged her to try, but Katie knew her limits. She didn't want to spend her last days in sterile rooms and mechanical rhythms. She wanted to go home, to the house where her memories lived, to the garden where she had once watched Will chase fireflies, to the place where she had learned, again and again, how to forgive. Bill agreed reluctantly. He moved heaven and earth to make her comfortable. Nurses came and went, machines hummed quietly, and the world outside their windows carried on. But inside, time seemed to stop. Every conversation felt like a countdown, every breath like a fragile victory. In her final days, Katie's fear began to fade. What replaced it wasn't peace exactly, it was clarity. She understood now that love had always been her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. She had spent her life trying to save people, Bill, Will, even Brooke, but she had never learned how to save herself. Yet in the end, she realized that perhaps saving herself wasn't the point. What mattered was that she had loved fiercely, imperfectly, but truthfully. When she finally closed her eyes for the last time, Bill was beside her. He held her hand until the warmth left it. He didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the woman who had been both his salvation and his punishment. The days that followed were a blur of condolences and hollow words. Bill buried her with quiet dignity, his face an unreadable mask. But inside, he was unraveling. The empire he had built, the power he had wielded, none of it could protect him from the silence she left behind. And then, as Katie had feared, Luna returned, this time not as a visitor, but as a presence. She offered comfort, whispered that she understood his pain, promised to help him move forward. Bill, broken and lost, didn't see the trap being set. Luna knew exactly when to touch his hand, when to look into his eyes, when to remind him that he was still a man capable of love. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to fill the void Katie had left. She took over the spaces Katie once occupied, the office, the dinner table, the late-night conversations. She spoke softly of closure, but dreamed of control. The empire that had once belonged to both Bill and Katie now began to tilt under Luna's influence. Will, devastated by his mother's death, watched helplessly as his father slipped deeper into Luna's orbit. He tried to warn him, tried to remind him of Katie's strength, of her wisdom, of the warnings she had left behind. But Bill couldn't hear. Grief had made him blind, and Luna knew exactly how to use that blindness. In the end, Katie's death became not just the loss of a life, but the beginning of another storm. Her absence created a vacuum that drew darkness back into the world she had spent her life trying to purify. The tragedy of her illness, the secrecy, the love, and the sacrifice, all of it culminated in a haunting truth that, even in death, she could not escape the consequences of her choices. Yet somewhere, beyond the reach of pain and time, Katie's spirit lingered, not as a ghost, but as a reminder. Her love for Bill, though it had brought both joy and ruin, remained eternal. And as Luna's shadow grew over the Spencer family, somewhere in the quiet corners of Bill's heart, the memory of Katie still flickered, fragile but unextinguished, a light that would one day remind him that real love does not manipulate, does not control, does not destroy. It endures, even in the face of death.
Oh,